Ever since Project Eve was showcased at that PlayStation showcase 3 years ago, I've been interested in it. If you know me, I'm a huge fan of hack and slash games, as well as the Soulsborne genre. Project Eve looked like a pretty interesting mix of both of those things, plus I thought the main character looked pretty cool for no particular reason. Getting rebranded as Stellar Blade just 1 year later got me even more excited, 'cause stellar is one of my favorite words. I also got to play a character in Cyberpunk 2077 named Stella, so it all kind of felt like fate to me. Flashy gameplay, great title, a main character that is clearly a member of the Sisterhood of Black Bangs. I was sure to love this game. Well, I didn't love Stellar Blade, but I liked it a lot. I liked it so much so that I've actually platinumed Stellar Blade over the course of 2 full playthroughs across 50 hours of gameplay. That's every costume, every skill point ability unlock, every weapon upgrade, every drone upgrade, every side quest, main quest, and side quest bulletin board completed. I have done everything you can do in Stellar Blade, making me the most qualified woman in this galaxy to talk about Stellar Blade. This game has been the center of controversy as of late, a lot of social media culture war nonsense that I'm not interested in, but also a lot of comparisons to Nier Automata and Bayonetta, which I'm very interested in talking about. So let's talk about Stellar Blade. That was corny. Why did I do that? Stellar Blade is a Souls-like game that can kind of be turned into a hack and slash if you try hard enough. Stellar Blade's combat is as methodical and purposeful as any good Souls-like. Light and heavy sword attacks are your primary form of offense, and enemies hit really hard, so dodging and parrying are super important to surviving. Something I felt during my first ever exposure to this game in its demo was its pretty stiff control feel. The game feels slow at first, mostly while in lock-on stance. There's a pretty big learning curve to timing attacks and parrying. It's hard to describe, but the game isn't as loose as something like DMC, Bloodborne, or even Sekiro. Stellar Blade is a very precise experience at the beginning. Once you get it all down, the loop becomes second nature. The game kind of makes up for its strict timings with its absolutely orgasmic parries. I swear, game devs are all in competition to create the perfect parry. A sort of Sekiro-like posture system is also tied to this game's parries, so whittling an enemy down and leaving them completely open grants an almost definitive one-hit strike. Land every perfect parry in succession and you'll feel like a stellar goddess.
Let's fucking
Unlike your typical Souls game, this title has built-in attack strings, and a bunch of them at that. I was a little baffled on my first playthrough having the attacks on the face buttons, cause that would suggest, usually, hack and slash elements, right? I was playing way more carefully until I realized how aggressive your combos can be if you try hard enough. Mixing in these dial-in combos, depending on the enemy type's speed, is crucial while factoring in parries to stay in the action, to stay right up on them. That's Stellar Blade's main appeal. You can also upgrade your basic strings to deliver your very own unblockable attacks on final hit. These always felt good to perform. Seeing Eve cut straight through an eldritch nightmare as it's about to pummel her is super cinematic. Speaking of our main girl, she doesn't just come equipped with these basic attacks, but also beta and burst skills. All of these particular abilities are incredibly powerful and run on their own energy types. That's right, Eve literally has beta energy. There are skills for dealing heavy damage to singular targets, there are a few AoEs, one literally being Judgment Cut End, and also some more interesting ones like powering yourself up, increasing your overall speed, and specifically breaking down an enemy's guard to knock them off balance. Beta and burst energy is replenished by landing hits, parries, and dodges. I really like this system because it forces you to kind of get good at the basics of combat to earn those larger attacks. This aspect of combat gives me hack and slash vibes, reminding me of building up Devil Trigger in DMC1 specifically to use at key moments. I'm really glad these skills weren't tied to a cooldown timer like you'd see in a game like FF16, for example, where you can just Mega Flare and then wait a little bit and then Mega Flare again free of charge. I feel like there's always been this secret underground struggle with how to balance super moves in hack and slash games. Sometimes they can add interesting utility to combos, but a ton of damage output. And sometimes they can be too powerful, resulting in absolute screen clearer skills that are essentially one-hit win buttons. I think what Stellar Blade is doing here is pretty cool. It isn't innovative or new, it's just very well made. An ability that I was pretty impressed with are the blink and repulse dodges. So blink is triggered when an enemy's attack flashes blue. Dodging forward at the right time sees Eve skate around them stylishly, getting free back attacks and opening them up for a relentless assault. Repulse dodges happen when monster attacks flash in pink, seeing Eve knock them back, opening up their weakness cores for massive visceral attacks. You obviously get more blinks than you do repulses, and the game does a great job at mixing these attacks in to keep you on your toes. What's great about these dodges is you can do them from a fairly healthy distance, and even during certain actions like your own attacks and side dodges. I've had so many moments where during a combo or even after getting off the ground from knockdown, I was able to skirt by another giant attack and turn the tide of battle. I've only encountered a handful of times where Eve would dodge past the blink window, leaving her exposed to the next attack, but these were few and far between, and never really became a problem for me. There's a lot of risk-reward to Stellar's gameplay, with parrying being such a big focus, and I absolutely love it. The combat loop is honestly addictive. I mean, I beat the game twice, so, you know. A quick thing I wanted to mention is how phenomenal Eve's animations are. I love how stylish and absolutely feminine all of her attacks look. They even change depending on the level of certain beta and burst abilities. The team definitely outdid themselves with all of the animation work in this game. Speaking of Eve, she also comes equipped with a drone that turns into a firearm. The gun feels very hack and slashy, meaning it barely does damage most of the time. There are a few firing types, like shotgun shells and stinger missiles, but I found that outside of dealing with basic bitch enemies, I don't think you'll be getting much use out of this weapon. Overall, it's quite cumbersome to switch to, and it actually breaks your lock-on every time you draw it. You can upgrade the gun and all of its ammo types, but even then the game feels like it picks and chooses which enemies it wants to do damage to. The gun is also used in a few small environment puzzles out in the open world, and a few specific linear set piece levels, where they buff its damage considerably. That was probably the most utility I ever got out of it, and that's because sword combat is just way more fun. What the gun really needs is a quick shot function, something you could pull off without shifting focus to over-the-shoulder aiming, and something you can add into your combos. This gun went largely unused for me, even when enemy weakness situations presented themselves. Like many other Souls-likes, there is a smattering of RPG systems presented here, like skill trees, boring, obviously, a gear system, which is pretty neat, and visual character customization. I really dislike the implementation of the survival skill tree in particular, because a lot of very basic things like making perfect dodge and parries better are tied to this thing. You can't even dodge twice in a row without activating it as a skill. It's so lame. Even charging up unblockable attacks or being able to do follow-ups after dodges are things you have to spend skill points on to unlock. I get wanting the player to unlock the big beta and burst skills, but I'm really sick of this type of tutorialization being present in so many modern video games. I feel like even in other Souls games, parries would just be a reliable thing you could get good at, and that's all you had to worry about. It kind of feels like Dark Souls 2 adaptability. In Stellar Blade, you have to get good at timing while also having to improve a gameplay function with skill points over time. On the other hand, the gear system is pretty cool. These are items that improve certain aspects of the game's systems. Having done everything, fully upgrading all of this stuff, I noticed that playing around with certain gear pieces really changed how Eve felt to play. Equipping a ton of defense items helps you feel like a tank. Equipping and upgrading reflex gear makes perfect parries even easier. And you can even buff your combo output damage, encouraging and rewarding getting into an enemy's face even more. I know challenge is the core of the Soulsborne genre, but in Stellar Blade, it really feels like the devs wanted to make a more enjoyable and accessible gameplay experience to get through. You feel this through all aspects of the game, including gearing up Eve however you want. More damage output for combos? Go for it. More hits taken? Shake it, baby. You can even add more ammo to your pea shooters. Knock yourself out, cause that might actually happen if you try to rely on your gun. So that's Eve's kit. Let's talk about the disgusting creatures you're going up against. So the Naytiba enemies you constantly fight are almost unbearable to look at for me. There's a lot of crustacean and bug-like design infused with human biology, and it really gets to me. I know I've established myself as a horror person, but these bugs looked too disgusting. Which I guess makes me feel extra powerful when I absolutely demolish them with all of my sick parries and combos. They also play well too. Like any good action melee combat game, the creatures here all have pretty amazing animation work and well-telegraphed attacks for your sick parries. On normal mode, they get a decent amount of health and attack power, but admittedly you will be cutting through these guys fairly quickly if you're skilled enough. Even on New Game Plus, where enemies become more plentiful, you'll be trashing them even harder. The hard mode difficulty does make these guys quite challenging in the sense that they hit you harder and take way more damage. But even then, once you upgrade Eve, you can dispatch these guys pretty successfully. So the experience sort of balances out, which in essence is pretty great. I love Souls-like challenge as much as the next gamer, but I also love having fun and feeling powerful. And if I get to play a game where I basically control an idealized version of myself, wrecking my worst nightmares, well, I say, bring it on. I should also mention that there are a bunch of robot enemies, and they all look so much cooler than the monsters, in my opinion. But I guess if they just had all robots, more people would compare the title to Nier. A lot of larger enemies are quite biblical in their visual design, which I also loved. The boss fights are all pretty great, if a little easy on first play. Since a lot of them are massive creatures, their tells are all a lot easier to spot, making parries and dodges a cinch. Like many other action games Stellar Blade emulates, the smaller badass boss swordsman trope is actually here, and is obviously the best version of the boss fights that you can have. I don't want to go too deep into this particular aspect, but just know the bosses are very well designed and can be quite the challenge on hard mode. Stellar Blade has two level types: linear Souls-like folding level design and big open-ended zones. The construction of each traditional level is great. You get exactly what you'd expect out of a Souls game. Long, winding hallways that lead to hub rooms. Uniquely, in this game's case, platforming shows up a lot, which is very hit or miss. And of course, shortcut doors that lead back to said hubs. All the usual suspects are here and are pretty frickin' well made. There's a lot of good exploration for character and equipment upgrades, like finding and recovering the memories of Eve's fallen comrades for pieces of health and beta energy upgrades, and chasing down this game's version of the Crystal Lizard for your drone and mechanical upgrades. You can find tons of these types of things, and on New Game Plus, another batch of upgrades shows up to boost your stats even more. It's really fun, hits the spot adventure gameplay done very well. While I think the gameplay design of these levels is interesting, I certainly wasn't blown away by sewer level, another sewer level, train station, train yard, and so on. The visual design of each level can be a little unimaginative early on, though this visual level design does get a lot better in the final few hours, with much more interesting and varied locales, like snowy mountains and very cyberpunky looking landscapes. Stellar's gimmick for each traditional level are these big Uncharted style set pieces. I think they're cool the first time, but on repeat playthroughs, you kinda get it. Like, okay, let me get back to playing, please. There's also one where you have to dodge missiles being fired at you by turrets, and it is one of the most frustrating things I've played in a recent game. Thankfully, these events are few and far between, but some can just be so random, like the Silent Hill downpour slide coming back from the dead. What's going on here? What are we doing? The big open-ended zones consist of a forgotten nuclear wasteland and a giant desert that looks like you're playing Nier Automata at home. It was exactly the same vibe I got from the linear levels, unfortunately. Like, these world maps are fantastic to explore, but I wasn't a big fan of them visually. I was going to say something like, eventually the environments grew on me, but really I just kind of dealt with them. By the end of my 100% run, I was absolutely sick of all the sand and how coarse it was. That being said, everything looks very high fidelity, which is something, I guess. I'm gonna touch on the game's overall visuals in a second, but for now, I wanted to say that I loved how silly and absurdly gamey a lot of the open world exploration is. There are so many fun little moments like environmental puzzles that unlock new paths or collectibles. I love how you can just run, swim, and traverse up and over all the terrain. I also can't get enough of Android Eve making submarine noises when clicking the scan button underwater. It's the cutest shit I've ever seen. She's a little boat, look at her go. There's even a collectible hunt for ancient soda cans. Yes, this is Eve's hobby because she's a silly fish out of water, and some of these cans are insanely well hidden. I'm talking Castlevania 2 levels of out of the way. It's so cool having to really think and use all of the tools at my disposal to uncover the game's treasures. I came across so many secrets that I have a feeling that Stellar Blade will be one of those games that people will be finding hidden treasures in for months. I think if you play this game, you'll feel the passion that the team has for classic games. You know how tons of PS2 era games just kind of existed and didn't make any sense, but were there to serve fun first and foremost? Stellar Blade feels like one of those titles, in the gameplay department at least. There's also a fairly well-made fishing minigame. I caught a literal whale shark in a small pond. How do you expect me not to like this game? Before I move on, I did want to confirm to my audience specifically that yes, there are Resident Evil levels, and you do get a Leon jacket during one of them. So by default, this game gets my badass seal of approval if they weren't incredibly boring. Anyhow, accompanying this semi-open world design are, of course, side quests. I won't spend too much time on these because, surprise to no one, they aren't very good. A lot of them boil down to go here, get thing, or kill monster, and talk to randomly generated guy, mash through boring, poorly translated dialogue. The script does no favors for these characters. The writing is so poor that it genuinely feels like a robot came up with a lot of it. What's extra painful about this is there's a really strange thing this game does with NPC conversations. For some reason, you really have to mash to get through the dialogue you've heard a million times. It's frustrating, and this aspect of design plagues each and every shopkeeper as well. So sometimes you just want to buy some potions, and every time the shopkeeper has to tell you how much you can't handle them. Doing the side quests usually leads to the good combat, but the bookends for each of these stories can be a chore to get through. There is not a single interesting side character in Stellar Blade. During my first couple of hours, I was baffled by the game's overall visual aesthetic. A lot of environments look very thrown together. In the starting area, Eidos 7, you can identify traces of Art Deco in the tallness of the architecture, a bit of Soviet-era brutalism. There's even some Victorian iconography with Roman, Greek, and classical Christian statues just littered everywhere. There's Russian and English text on signs, and just none of it coalesces. It makes for a quite messy looking game world, and I'm not saying that the devs did this specifically, but it almost feels like something you'd see in a store-bought Unreal Marketplace asset game or something. I'm sure the team actually made these places by hand because they're a AAA Sony studio, but there's barely any consistency to it. The words that come to mind are visual vomit. The main hub, Zion, is the last bastion of humanity, and here you may actually expect a town that looks like something I just described with Eidos 7, but this place is like a Gears of War era brown and gray mess of its own. Here you also meet all of the side quest characters, and it's also here where I started to question my sanity. I would not be surprised if each of these dudes was randomized in some character creation tool. They're also incomprehensible in their design. First off, none of these men have faces, and it's really off-putting. Like, I get that you want us to look at the girls, they're beautiful, but like, I don't know, give us some attractive men too? I don't know. They don't even have to be attractive, just give us some faces. Second, this is the town hairstylist. This mishmash of cobbled together metal and fake skin. I'm convinced this guy was randomly placed here at the last minute. One of the hairstyles you can choose for Eve says that it's this guy's trademark hairstyle, like the one he uses to style his own hair, but he clearly doesn't have hair or a face, so what are they talking about? I decided to look around his shop to maybe find a photo of him from before when he had a face, but all I could find was a framed picture of him and someone else from high school. That's literally what the caption says. What? I lost my mind meeting this dude. I was convinced the game was trolling me or something. To add to the confusion, they even reuse his model for a boss fight later on. Remember how I said Eve likes to collect cans? Well, the in-universe reason for why those cans exist is because the art on them used to be NFTs on the blockchain in the game's past. So are they saying the world fell apart due to the blockchain because no one actually uses it in real life? Or are they saying the blockchain is an advanced super cool piece of tech. I don't know. I don't think this game knows what it wants to say about any narrative elements that it presents. There's also this other character in Zion named Barry, and he is one of the worst written characters I've ever experienced in a game.
Sorry, but we're closed for the day. I'm in no mood to continue working.
Okay, I'll be back.
Angel, hold on just a minute.
Huh?
Aren't you curious why I don't want to work? You can ask.
And why do I need to know?
You're right. I guess it's not that interesting. But please, could you just allow me to explain myself? I thought talking about it would make me feel better.
Barry from Resident Evil 1 makes more sense than this guy. Even our main cast look like they're all from different games, to an extent. Eve is like a Korean MMO character, Adam's like an RE Engine photorealistic protagonist, and Lily looks like she belongs in Final Fantasy. You get entire scenes where all of them are in the same shot talking to Techno Gandalf over here, who also looks like he's from another game, and it's just super uncanny. To be fair, I mentioned before that the late game gets pretty cool looking, but this was the game for most of my first playthrough experience, slaying monsters and then getting hit with the uncanny valley. My biggest issue with Stellar's art direction is that if you take Eve out of any of these scenes, in the early game at least, it can look almost unidentifiable. Like these environments can belong in any game, you know? I only really felt like I was playing Stellar Blade visually when I got to the final few hours, where I was seeing uniquely designed cool environments. I wish there was more of this super cyberpunk religious theme going on that we get at the end, because it's genuinely cool. But sadly, most of my experience were these purposeless places that just felt absolutely soulless. Before I move on, there was a moment I had that made my jaw hit the floor in disbelief. In the 807 map, I randomly stumbled across a certain ancient Greek statue. I know some of you are already freaking out seeing this. This is Hermaphroditus, the literal transgender goddess of Greek mythology. I was so blown away by this that I immediately ran over to the other side and was shocked to see her stellar blade in full view. This is a real thing in this game, and I think it goes to show just how truly random this title's visuals can get. Well, something that is undeniably great about this title's presentation is its sound design, namely the game's music. It's been documented already, but people who worked on the Nier soundtracks worked on this game, and it's super apparent. The OST for Stellar Blade is fantastic, even though it might stray a little too far into sounding like music from Automata, but there is wholly original music during key moments, like the game's epic theme song being used in a really cool set piece towards the end. I'll be honest with you guys, every song in this game is sick, and I've actually been humming a few pieces of music ever since I first played it. I've got no complaints about the OST, and I will be buying it when it's out. So that's all of Stellar Blade's gameplay. It is quite fun. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. However, as we all know, video games aren't just their gameplay nowadays. They're also stories. Stories that are capable of winning awards. I hate to break this to you, but Stellar Blade's story ain't winning any awards anytime soon. If Stellar Blade's gameplay had me feeling like this, its story most definitely left me like this. In this monster-filled romp, you play as Stellar Babe Eve, an airborne squadron battle android from a colony of space ladies sent to a destroyed dystopian Earth with the goal of ridding the lands of Naytibas, a Lovecraftian alien threat that has completely saturated and taken over the planet. So this game just starts on an action set piece. Eve drops down to Earth with her fellow Eves. Our best friend Taki, which is short for Tachyon, by the way, saves Eve in an almost reverse baptism of sorts. The luckless child, Eve, is reborn into a new world of death and misery. As they clear the beach, our duo are caught off guard by a massive monster. Effortlessly and synergetically killing the creature alerts another demonic entity, which happens to outright kill Taki. For the rest of this game, we never see anything relating to Eve's squad back on her space colony, or any flashbacks of her and Taki's relationship. We don't know if they're sisters, lovers, besties, or master and student. What this game really needs is an intro showing what the squad and their space heaven culture was like before the inciting events of this game. I was expecting Eve to open up more about her home and Taki as the game progressed, but there isn't any of that, sadly. To my shock, just a few days before the recording of this video, a motion comic was released showing Taki and Eve sparring back home. And of course, my first thought was, why is this not in the game? There's a lot of Bible all throughout this story, but outside of the plainly visible Adam and Eve material, the spirit leader of Zion, Oracle, being an oracle of God, and Lily being Lilith, the game doesn't really explore its narrative inspirations deeper than surface level. There are some things that piqued my curiosity, like discovering what the Naytibas are and how that clashes with what the characters know about themselves, but pretty much all of the unfolding story is incredibly predictable. It's predictable if you've played the demo. Hell, it's predictable if you've played Nier Automata. If there was ever a connection to Bayonetta, I guess it'd be some of the heavenly designs of the Naytiba, although I think Bayo did the cursed biblical angel thing a little bit better with how they break apart in real time, showing you the grime and rot under their pristine surface. In Stellar, the monsters look like monsters, and that's not a bad thing, it's just, it is what it is. Eve has a British accent, I guess that's kind of a Bayo thing. She does sound amazing, but one other thing severely affecting the story was its writing. There are some unnatural performances, but that's just a byproduct of the script being pretty bad. So yeah, unfortunately I found all of our leads pretty boring as well, especially Adam. He's such a big-time backseat gamer during the story missions, and it's like, bro, yeah, I know, calm down. I'm gonna walk down the street, I get it. I'm gonna pick up the key. The best way I can describe the faults of the characters is with a little comparison. You know when you play Nier Automata and you could just feel 2B's emotions brewing under the surface? Like she's gonna explode if 9S calls her ma'am one more time. She'd rather uphold the mandated emotionless of Yorha for feeling something for someone else. Or, you know, when 9S does actually explode with emotion when the android he loves gets hurt. In Nier A, the androids receiving emotions is described as a fault in their code, and that results in real drama, great storytelling. Stellar Blade is like if that emotional code implementation just never existed. The story surrounding the Eve Airborne Squadron and the rest of the android army is drip-fed in such a slow way, either through text files or in limited story cutscenes. One trait of Eve's character is she is a fish out of water. Like, she doesn't even know what fish are. After Eve's main goal of killing all Naytibas fails, she strives to kind of learn as much as possible about Earth's culture, about what came from the past, to kind of get back on track and maybe get revenge for Taki's death. Yeah, you guessed it, they don't do anything fun with this idea. Like, why not take advantage of Eve not knowing anything about Earth culture? Instead, everything is played painfully straight. No jokes, no humor, no cynicism, just Eve being Eve.
So, where do we go?
No time for breaks. Typical Eve.
You literally just met her, bro. Like 1 day ago. You don't know her. This game is packed with moments that'll have you scratching your head. Like, what did they mean by this? I guess I should mention Lily. So Lily is your typical cutesy, awkward nerd character. Her story is confusingly conveyed at first, having spent 2 full years trapped in a drop pod that you find her in. But then later in the game, you go to her hometown, but also some of her dialogue would suggest she's always known who Eve is. I had to read her codex entry to figure out the chronology of her life story. It did make sense in the end. I just had no clue what was going on with her in my first playthrough. Also, there's some really small gay implications. That's about all the flavor we get out of her character. She is really cute, and I hope they make her playable in the sequel. It's really funny having thoroughly experienced this game. Now seeing some people online think or even say this title is like a sex game or something. Outside of outfits Eve can wear, there's nothing like that in this game, unfortunately. The story is completely boring for about 80% of the runtime. There's absolutely nothing in the way of emotion, and like I've been harping on about, the script is just really bad. It's hard to connect with any of the characters or any of the struggles they go through. I know I've been doing a lot of dunking, but what's great about this story is around the 70% mark, the characters go to a location called Eidos 9. From here, the energy of the story changes significantly. There are more cutscenes that flesh out what's happening. Adam gets lost. A somewhat bond between Eve and Lily begins to form. And like I mentioned earlier, the environments get so much cooler. Don't get me wrong though, the writing is still god-awful.
I think I have a really great idea. You could leave the drone operation to me. Adam can take the hoverbike back to Zion while I operate. A perfect plan, right?
Lily, not just anyone is able to operate drones. You need a wide field of view, the ability to make smart decisions fast, and...
And the stabilizer, scanner, and link sensors do all the work for you.
How did you...
The downside to this shift up is that by the time I had gotten to this part of the game, I had done every side quest, experiencing some genuinely mind-numbing dialogue and storytelling. When the main narrative finally decided to pick up steam, I felt a little indifferent. Not completely checked out, but indifferent. I'm gonna spoil something that happens in the story, so skip to the time on screen. You've been warned. Okay, here we go. If you've watched the very first trailer for this game, you'd know that Taki is literally shown as an evil boss fight. The emotions in this scene are middling at best. When Taki dies again in Eve's arms, she mutters the words, "My Eve," which made me think there was a deeper connection between these two. Maybe there is, but the game barely wanted to tell me about it. Right after this, Lily, no joke, hands Eve Taki's Devil Trigger. You get an entirely new combat form with its own moveset and costume transformation with no explanation. I was completely baffled by this. In other better action game stories, you'd get this DT during a major emotional story moment. The idea that earning something so powerful and so cool, just being handed to you out of context like this, blows my fucking mind. Eve needed to discover this power of love or friendship or whatever it is in a death-defying battle. I hope the devs update this and flesh it out more, because this was a massive missed opportunity for giving Eve a much-needed moment to flesh out her freaking character. You start the game with Taki, end up fighting this Naytiba-possessed version of her, and then kind of forget about her for 15 hours until the plot wants you to remember. It really sucks. One of my recent hobbies has been editing screenshots of Eve smiling in different ways, and she looks so cute. She is so miserably bland throughout the story, so seeing her like this honestly made me happy. I wish she got to express herself more, but all we get is her being a boring android who says, "May your memories live on forever," over and over and over again. I get that she's traumatized losing Taki, so this expression is kind of a tribute to that. But after hearing it like 700 times doing all of the side quests, the last shred of any meaning the phrase held was completely lost for me. This may be hard to believe, but with all of that said, I do feel that the story finishes very strongly. Stellar Blade wears its inspirations on its sleeve. One of the endings, the true ending, feels a bit like the devs kind of shedding those inspirations a bit. I really hope that's true because a lot of the time, whenever I was doing main story, it was reminding me of Nier, and I kind of just wanted to play Nier instead. I hope I don't sound like a whiny baby comparing and complaining about Stellar's story. It's just, I love Nier so much, and so many people online were saying this was gonna be the next Nier, or Nier 3, and it really isn't. Listen, I really enjoyed playing this game. It is fantastic. It's addictive. The combat system is great. I just wish the story it was telling to accompany its fantastic gameplay was on the same level. As far as I can tell, Stellar Blade is its team's very first console game, and to be honest, I think it's a great game. It might be a little messy, but I'm really curious to see how they might be able to improve upon the game's lower qualities. I'm definitely not a hater, but I will be watching closely for whatever updates or expansions inevitably come to this game. I'm rooting for Stellar Blade. I want there to be as many badass girl characters out there as humanly possible. I also want them to be interesting. Until then, I'll keep slaying. Overall, I really liked Stellar Blade as a video game. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't really do much new or even innovative, but what it does do is highly polished and very fun. Since this game will most likely get a sequel, I really hope Shift Up, the game's studio, can go in their own direction a little bit more and leave their inspirations on the cutting room floor just a bit. I hope they put way more time into telling a much better story in whatever comes next. The greatest feeling that Stellar Blade has left me with is that I want to see what comes next. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to my big booty girlfriend, Taki. She's so beautiful. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to end this. So I guess I'll just